Records show that long before the name became global shorthand for scandal, there were files. Quiet files. Memos, sealed agreements, calendars, flight logs, and interviews that did not circulate publicly. They moved slowly, through offices and inboxes, accumulating weight without attention. According to records, concerns were raised years before the world took notice, but they remained contained, managed, and deferred. In the early accounts, the story appears fragmented. Different jurisdictions, different timelines. Reports suggest that law enforcement agencies received tips that did not immediately converge. Complaints appeared isolated. Each one, on its own, seemed small enough to be handled locally, quietly, without urgency. Documents indicate that this fragmentation mattered. It created distance between events that, in hindsight, appear connected. According to court records, initial investigations moved forward and then stalled. Witness statements were taken and archived. Interviews were summarized and filed away. The pace was procedural, deliberate, and slow. Nothing about the process suggested panic. There was time. There was patience. There was restraint. The machinery of justice turned, but it did not accelerate. Reports suggest that legal negotiations began early, long before public scrutiny intensified. These discussions happened out of sight, guided by attorneys and shaped by precedent. According to records, agreements were drafted that limited exposure and narrowed accountability. Language was precise. Outcomes were contained. What remained outside those agreements was not always clear to those affected. The delay was not dramatic. It was administrative. It took the form of extensions, continuances, jurisdictional boundaries, and negotiated settlements. Documents indicate that each step followed legal norms, yet the cumulative effect was distance from resolution. Time passed. Memories faded. Witnesses moved on. Records remained. As years progressed, the silence around the case grew heavier. According to reports, journalists attempted to revisit earlier filings but encountered sealed documents and restricted access. Public records existed, but they told an incomplete story. Key details were missing, redacted, or deferred to later proceedings that never seemed to arrive. Influence is difficult to measure in formal documents, but patterns appear. According to records, the subject of these files maintained connections across finance, politics, and social circles. These connections did not constitute proof of protection, but they formed a context. In that context, decisions were made carefully, often conservatively, and always within the bounds of legal language. Reports suggest that some investigators expressed frustration privately. Memos indicate concern about the narrow scope of charges and the limited reach of accountability. Yet those concerns did not always translate into action. The system allowed for disagreement, but it also allowed for closure without consensus. As the years continued, the files did not disappear. They waited. According to records, new complaints surfaced, echoing earlier allegations. The details differed, but the themes were familiar. Locations repeated. Timelines overlapped. Still, responses remained cautious. The past had already been processed once, and revisiting it required reopening decisions that had been formally resolved. Documents indicate that when renewed attention emerged, it did not begin within the justice system. It came from outside. Journalistic investigations reassembled fragments that had never been fully connected. Public records requests exposed patterns. Interviews resurfaced voices that had previously been marginalized or dismissed. The renewed scrutiny raised questions about delay itself. According to analysts, time can function as a form of insulation. Legal outcomes become settled. Agreements become binding. Statutes of limitation narrow options. What was once actionable becomes historical. Justice, while not denied outright, becomes constrained by procedure. As attention intensified, so did the complexity of the narrative. Reports suggest that multiple agencies revisited earlier decisions, each within its own mandate. Coordination was imperfect. Responsibility was diffuse. No single institution could account for the full timeline without relying on others. The language of official responses remained careful. According to statements, actions taken in the past were described as appropriate for the information available at the time. Hindsight was acknowledged, but separated from accountability. The system explained itself without indicting itself. Silence played a role as well. Documents indicate that non-disclosure agreements limited what could be said publicly. Settlements closed cases without public hearings. Victims' voices, when present, were often mediated through legal representatives. The story, as told officially, lacked human texture. As the narrative deepened, unanswered questions multiplied. Why were certain avenues not pursued? Why were some testimonies deemed insufficient, while others were never formally recorded? According to records, these questions were noted, but rarely resolved conclusively. The delay altered perception. What might have been understood as a series of urgent allegations became, over time, an archival problem. Files accumulated rather than conclusions. The passage of time transformed immediacy into abstraction. When later proceedings finally moved forward, they did so under intense scrutiny. According to reports, every decision was examined not only for legality, but for symbolism. The past delays framed the present actions. Justice, now visible, carried the weight of its absence. Yet even then, documents indicate that the process remained bounded by what had already occurred. Evidence was limited by time. Testimony was shaped by memory. The scope of accountability reflected earlier choices. Throughout the narrative, power appears not as a single force, but as an environment. According to records, access to resources, legal expertise, and networks shaped outcomes indirectly. Nothing in the files confirms explicit interference, but the structure favored containment over exposure. The delayed justice became part of the story itself. Analysts note that delay changes outcomes without breaking rules. It operates within the system, not against it. In this case, time did not erase the files, but it softened their impact. As public attention reached its peak, the contrast between early silence and later intensity became stark. According to observers, the system appeared reactive rather than proactive. Action followed visibility, not the other way around. Even now, the files remain incomplete. Some documents are still sealed. Some questions remain unanswered. According to records, investigations concluded without resolving every thread. Closure was procedural, not comprehensive. The story of delayed justice is not only about one individual or one case. It reflects how systems manage complexity, risk, and reputation. According to scholars, delay can function as a neutral process while producing deeply unequal outcomes. As the narrative settles into the historical record, it leaves behind a pattern rather than a verdict. Documents indicate where time mattered, where silence accumulated, and where action arrived late. The delay did not end the story, it defined it. And in the quiet after the final filings, the files remain. Not as evidence of a single failure, but as a record of how justice, when slowed, changes